The reason Parkwest was started, it wasn't my idea. I forget who it was, but a bunch of us got together, and Julian Bond and a fellow named Cruikshank, who was with the AFL-CIO, were on the board of American Hospital Association. And their ambition was to have doctors working for the hospital. So we decided, why don't we doctors get together and start a hospital where we have the say-so?
Well, I can't help but think now, since Parkwest is owned by company, our greatest enemy was Fort Sanders. And I happened to be chief of staff at Fort Sanders and chairman of the board here at the same time.
$2,145,728.32. That represents the amount of money that we had to borrow. We had a line of credit at Third National, Thad Cox Bank, was that Third National? And that's the amount of money that we borrowed before we could neutralize on cash flow, and then began paying back that. And we heard Dr. Montgomery this morning indicate that when he came in 1978, that was the first time that there was a cash distribution to the investors. So it took us from 73 to 78. And the first 2 years, we were literally borrowing money. Then it took us 2 years to pay it back before we had a positive cash to distribute.
Wayne was at Baptist and I was working for the Department of Labor, the State Department. And I remember he called me and we met over here at when they were building the hospital. And I looked around, and to make it kind of short, Wayne called me a few days later and said, well, he offered me the job. And I said, well, I've never been a personnel director before. And he said, I've never been an administrator before, so we'll just do it together. And so when I first came to work, that building over there looks very familiar, but my first office was, I had an outside view literally because the outside wall had not been put in yet. And I think my first desk was 2 sawhorses and a piece of plywood, and I did have a telephone.
I came to the open house and decided this is where I wanted to work. I was working at UT then. And I came and interviewed. I sat on a crate and filled out an application. I don't remember if John still had sawhorses or not. So I came to work on December 31st of 73. And then I fell in love.
So I called and got an interview. Well, I got lost. You know, I lived off West Hills, and at that time, past West Hills, it was country. I got off the interstate and turned right. I was in the country. There was nothing there. And I thought, I'm not going to make it to my interview. I can't even find the hospital. Did find the hospital and met Miss Cookie Irwin. She interviewed me. She took me on a tour of ICU there. It was not finished. We were kind of stepping over things and all, but she offered me the job. It was night shift, and I gladly took it.
We would have people come in who said, I've been hired by Dr. So-and-so, and he told me to show up to work. I said, do you have an application? Well, no. So we had people coming in from the outside, and things worked out, but it was very interesting. The pre-opening from August to December, working while the construction was still going on in the hospital, and you could hear it all day long. It all paid off because we hired an awful lot of good employees from the original opening of the hospital.
But we had procedure books to write, we had everything to do, but we had copies, luckily, from different places that we could piece together and insert our name, and we were able to get our procedures and policies together, which took 8 hours a day, 8 days a week. But it was fun. We enjoyed it.
When she was talking about the procedure book, Charlotte would call me. I was still working part-time at Baptist. And I took some of their procedures that she needed and actually would take them and copy them and bring them back the next day and then give
We
the
didn't
copy
cheat.
to Charlotte. Well, Baptist didn't want to share because they had lost Mr. Heatherly, they'd lost Cookie, they'd lost Charlotte. And I don't know at that time they knew I was leaving, but anyway, we got the procedures we needed.
And I remember before we ever actually opened the hospital, we did an awfully lot of cleaning and getting things in order, and it was just a wonderful experience that I'll never forget.
Unfortunately, I did the first surgical procedure done in this hospital. I could have selected a person with a little cancer on their cheek or something like that, but instead, I had a guy from Missouri that had a big cancer inside his mouth, in the floor of his mouth, his tongue, his jaw. So I scheduled him for a jaw, tongue, neck dissection, which wasn't good thinking. And I asked John, it's such a big operation, I asked John Whittington to help me. And he said, sure, he'd love to cut anyway. And so John and I took this patient to surgery. So we got in there and prepped. Well, no, when John walked in the room, he hit his head on the overhead lamp and said, that's got to be moved. They didn't do it that day, but I'm sure it was done later on. We got to doing this surgery, and it's a huge bloody operation, and I'd say, give me a hemostat. And they'd say, well, Dr. Noling, hemostats are on back order. I'd say, well, give me some Metzenbaum scissors. Well, Dr. Noling, I'm sorry, but those are on back order too.
We had a big steel strike in the United States, and it was very difficult to get instruments that we needed to do procedures. And in fact, it was probably 9 months before we got urology instruments in here. And they came from the Association of Operating Room Nurses convention. After the convention, they promised me I could have those instruments. And you couldn't borrow those things from other hospitals because they didn't have enough of them to loan them to you.
But we didn't have one piece one day for a surgeon. He was in the case, needed something, and he said, go to Sears. They've got a certain tool, a mechanical tool, on the shelf at Sears. Go down there and get that, bring it, sterilize it, and get it to me. Well, we did, and he did. And he operated with that piece of Craftsman equipment from Sears. True story, true story.
When we opened, we had all of these instruments in the recovery room on stretchers. The instruments had been purchased for us through Nashville. So we had no idea what some of the things even were. And it was our job to put the trays together. It got a little interesting because then it would be a guessing game to see who could name the instrument and what are we going to do with it.
If you go back to the early 70s, that's such a different culture then. Look through the eyes of that culture as far as dealing with hospitals, and that's why Parkwest had such opposition. I was working with the Knoxville Academy then, I was on the board. A lot of people had a lot of animosity against this hospital out here because the culture of the time said it wasn't nice for doctors. It wasn't correct for them to be involved in the business of medicine. We should divorce ourselves from that. It wasn't a noble thing to do. It was crass and looked down upon. What was interesting is several years later, going down to the academy, most of the doctors says, boy, we wish we'd have done something like that. After managed care came in and the business of medicine grew so much that it really started encroaching upon medicine and how you practice medicine. Then they looked back and wished we'd have had more of a say-so in how medicine is practiced.
I used to go to academy meetings also. And at first, when I started going there, I'd hear people say, "Oh, you're at Parkwest." And then I started hearing it louder and louder, and I finally realized they're not complaining, they're intimidated. And especially when we all of a sudden affiliated with HCA. And the next thing they did was triple our floor space, double our occupancy, and I said, "Whoa, what's going on here?" And then all of a sudden there's a lithotripter. Nobody had heard of a lithotripter. And Parkwest did two very important things in that respect. Number one is they refused to charge for parking, and that sounds little, but from a customer service thing, which we all talk about now, customer service, it was huge. Everybody in town wanted $5 to get in the door, and we were like, "You're welcome, come on."
My partners and I, bought 52 acres, Parkwest Boulevard. General Care did not want to get extra 8 acres for parking. And since I knew my brother-in-law, I threatened him and said, "We're going to have free parking. It's the only hospital in town, and it's a big deal. You may not think so, but it is."
It was a challenge to meet payroll sometimes, and because you can't spend more than you're taking in, but that first year was a hard year.
We, not me necessarily personally, but the controller would meet the mailman to get the incoming what appeared to be checks for the day, to get those processed and get them to the bank. We used the Third National down in Kingston Pike at the time, and he would run those down there as quickly as possible because payroll checks had been delivered, had been passed out the preceding day, and we didn't have enough to cover our payroll account, so we would make a mad dash to get down there with the checks just that day, the ink still fresh on those checks, to meet payroll that had occurred that week.
The other thing, talking about era of time, I just so remember, is when you got a call from a primary care doctor, general practice, you can get a call about Susie Smith. It was Smoothie Smith. I delivered her 3 children. Because, again, an era when prior to, after World War II, y'all started delivering babies, but so many of the general practitioners of the era, still the mid-70s, early 80s, he delivered so many babies. Albert Branson delivered babies, and they give you a family history. You didn't have to take a history from the patient. You got a history from the referring doctor, and they called you.
There was a fair amount of active exchange between Davis, Bankston, and Howe over who would deliver the first one. And I think there were individuals taking private bets as to who would come first. We were open up probably 2 weeks before they decided they had to tell their patients, obviously, where to come. So there was a bit of a gap communication-wise so they could have their patients come to the right place. Well, as it turned out, the first baby was delivered by Dr. Hollis Duncan. A patient came here by mistake, had not had prenatal care, and he happened to be here, and Dr. Duncan delivered. And I can tell you, I will not, but I can tell you the name of the patient right now. Remember his full name, and the middle name is West.
From a medical standpoint, we had people being sent from all over the country who were being sent because they were too sick to be operated on. And I remember talking to the anesthesia, and we were talking about how sick some of these people were, and we'd be consulted from a medical standpoint, and I was saying, look, if we can't take care of these people, we don't need to be doing the easy ones either. We need to be able to take care of the sick folks too.
Well, it was something that we decided that we were going to do, and that would be care for the patient and their families. From the very beginning, even in ICU, I remember telling Pam, please don't leave family out there with no connection.
We were small enough that we could all interact. You could know everybody. If you needed help, you could go to anybody, whether it was in your specialty or not. But we missed that as we kept growing and getting bigger. We missed that closeness that we had, I think, and it was just something very, very special to start out with a project that didn't have walls and then end up with something that we have today.
And then Dr. McLaughlin, got to know him quite well in the early days. And when we put in pacemakers, we didn't have a cath lab. We would go to the x-ray, and I got to where I kind of liked doing it. So whatever, if we had to put in a pacemaker, they would make me go do it. So the physician would go, and we would put in the pacemaker, and then we'd have the x-ray that would kind of, do the fluoro to make sure we were in the right place. So
the only cath lab was at UT, and then Baptist had just opened up theirs. There was a lot of hassle for time in the cath lab. And so Frank London at that point decided that, all right, we're closing the door, nobody else for right now. And so we had to go to Baptist, and once we were able to get the lab here, then our life turned around amazingly.
For the RNs here, do you remember our starting salary? I think it was $3.25. And I remember a couple of years later, we were looking at the budget for the next year, and I won't say who said these exact words, but they said, I never thought I'd see the day where we had to pay an RN $5 an hour. So for you RNs, you were worth much more than that. So,
but I'll have to say, in all honesty, that it was entirely the friendship and camaraderie that all of you showed me that it made Parkwest a wonderful place for me to work and for all of us to work. And more than anywhere else in town, I saw an organization of people who were working together, and they were working together with, not instead of, administration. When we had board meetings, it was all a matter of what do we need to do, what do we need to enhance what we're doing as physicians, and how do we get it. There was never any argument about whether, just how do we do it.
With the coming of Parkwest, how the other hospitals in the area all of a sudden got serious about getting better at everything they did. So if you could go back and stick a thermometer in the quality of the care there from the late 60s to 1980, you would see, in my opinion, as I've said, I was at another hospital at the time, and I know what we were doing there to gird up our loins to get better, to offset whatever this hospital might bring. And so I think the quality, if we did anything in this community during the 70s and 80s, it was to improve. We moved, even though we had a good teaching hospital at UT, we moved healthcare forward significantly. Can't quantify it, but I assure you it did happen.